we can tell you that Michael Carrick is in pole position to become the interim manager of Manchester United.
They do see this very much as an appointment just to steady the ship and try and qualify for Europe between now and the end of the season when one of those big name managers becomes available.
Carrick does seem a safe pair of hands for in this ridiculous situation.
It's very clever from Ineos because they know by hiring Michael Carrick that the pundits are going to get off their backs. They're not going to criticise a former teammate. That the fans will be happy because he's a club legend, and they don't have to spend any money in the window. But what they're effectively doing is they're writing off the rest of the season.
And if they send out a signal now that they're complacent about this season, then that will have an impact on results and performances for sure.
And the fact they're hiring an interim to the interim, I think, is a really bad look on Ineos.
For them to do it as quickly as they did without a plan is shambolic, to be honest.
And I do think it's about time we turn the spotlight on Jason Wilcock.
The planning is diabolical, and those at the top should pay.
Do I have any faith in Ineos to get this next appointment right? Do I necessarily think one of those top name managers want to work under this structure? The answer is no. I don't see it getting better anytime soon, and I don't really see too much to look forward to for the rest of this season.
talkSPORT chief football correspondent Alex Crook is here. Hello, good morning. You all right?
Yeah, good morning. Very well. Enjoyed the FA Cup weekend.
Yes, I say good morning. It could be anything where you are. If you're listening or watching this podcast, it could be afternoon, it could be evening, it could be any time of the day. Terry Gibson is here as well. Hello, Terry.
Good morning, Sam. How are you? Good morning, Alex.
Very, very, very good. I'm just going to let you know, unlike the Manchester United captain, we haven't been hacked. Everything that we say is our own nonsense, okay? All right? So just so you know. Imagine being hacked, by the way, and the worst thing that someone puts on your Twitter is 6-7. Awful. FA Cup weekend in just a moment. But Crook and I have been working on a story for the last few days, and I know lots of others have been digging into it as well. But we can tell you that Michael Carrick is in pole position to become the interim manager of Manchester United. Crookmeister, I reported on Thursday and Friday, I think Friday when we were in the studio together, that there was a shift in momentum towards the end of the week. What happened and where are we?
Well, I think first and foremost, when it looked like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, middle of last week, was the front runner, I think some at United were a little bit annoyed at the leaks coming from his camp. And actually, I think they're a bit concerned by the fact that he was hoping if he did well in interim charge, then maybe he would be seen as a contender for the job on a full-time basis, because they do see this very much as an appointment just to steady the ship and try and qualify for Europe between now and the end of the season when one of those big name managers becomes available, be it Thomas Tuchel, Mauricio Pochettino, Oliver Glasner, or even Carlo Ancelotti. I think that very much is the direction of travel. As I say, this is an interim appointment. I still think it's baffling for me that a club the size and stature of Manchester United seemingly can fire a manager without any definitive plan. And the fact they're hiring an interim to the interim, I think, is a really bad look on Ineos.
Well, this is the big issue, isn't it, Terry? The fact is that ego dictated that they fired Ruben Amorim because of what he said, not necessarily because of what he was doing. They've taken a manager they've known for a very, very long time that he's going to play a certain way. They were supposed to invest in that and help him fulfill his potential if he had that. But instead, because he decided to speak out of school when they didn't give him or had taken away the possibility of resourcing the squad in January, they've decided to fire him forthwith and without a plan to replace him, which seems a little bit, not unless I wouldn't say unprofessional. Well, maybe it is unprofessional, actually. The fact that a club of Manchester United's size doesn't have a plan B.
I would say it's unprofessional, and it almost appeared as if it was done on a whim. And yes, you could make a case for the results haven't been good enough, and there was a potential to make the managerial change. But you must have a plan. It's Manchester United. It's one of the biggest clubs in the world. For them to do it as quickly as they did without a plan is shambolic, to be honest. And now we're looking around at we've become accustomed to maybe a caretaker until we've had a caretaker manager in Darren Fletcher, who's a caretaker for the next caretaker manager. It's diabolical. The planning is diabolical, and those at the top should pay. I mean, this shouldn't happen to a club like Manchester United. With the best people in charge, which they should have, which they clearly haven't, they shouldn't be acting like this. And to have a caretaker for a caretaker, and then maybe look around. There are people about now. There's people they can go and poach. They've got the money to do that. They've got the pulling power to go and do that. Take a manager from another club somewhere else around Europe or from the UK, but it's just not. They're not acting like Manchester United should act.
And is this a byproduct, Crook, of not having experienced administrators? Omar Barada has worked at Manchester City, but he was not the CEO of Manchester City. He is the CEO of Manchester United. It's his first role at a big football club in that position. And Jason Wilcox, who only had 9 months as a technical director down at Southampton prior to joining Manchester United, is it that level of inexperience that has cost Manchester United here?
Well, it's a byproduct of Ineos and the fact that every decision they have made has turned to rubble. Apart from improving the training ground, I can't name you one thing that Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his cohorts have done well since they took charge of the day-to-day football operations. And I do think it's about time we turn the spotlight on Jason Wilcox. We had a big debate on our show on Friday about the role of sporting directors. It's no coincidence for me that if you look at the top of the Premier League table, the 3 clubs in the first 3 positions all have old school managers who are very much masters of their own kingdom. What you're seeing at other clubs, Chelsea, with their plethora of sporting directors, and Manchester United in particular, are people in the boardroom who want more say than they should in terms of what happens in the dugout. For Jason Wilcox to come out publicly and say, I'm a frustrated manager, well, if you're that good, Jason, put yourself in charge, because I tell you what, you haven't got the CV to be in the position of power you are at Manchester United, and you certainly haven't got the CV to go touting around that actually you're a manager at heart. And Ineos, you look at their list of achievements, Manchester United will play their fewest number of games in a season for more than 100 years as a byproduct of being knocked out of both cup competitions at the first hurdle. It's the earliest that's happened since 1981-82, since before I was even born. You go right back to the beauty parade they held when Eric Ten Hag was in situ. They completely undermined him, gave him a new contract, and then ended up having to pay him off just a few months later. They went courting Dan Ashworth. They spent months and several millions of pounds getting him from Newcastle. And then when he pushed back against their decisions, he was out the door. Do I have any faith in Ineos to get this next appointment right? Do I necessarily think one of those top-name managers want to work under this structure? The answer is no. And I tell you what, if anyone should be on the chopping block here, it's not Darren Fletcher, who I think did the best he could with the tools at his disposal. It's not Michael Carrick, whatever happens between now and the end of the season. It's Jason Wilcox and it's Omar Barada.
Yeah, and maybe Sir Jim Ratcliffe needs to have a bit of scrutiny as well. And interestingly, Terry, I mean, look, of the options available, basically Solskjaer, Fletcher and Carrick, I think Michael probably represents something a little bit different and fresher. A recent frontline manager in the second tier who did a reasonable job actually at Middlesbrough. And I think some of his achievements, especially in his first season and his second season when they had players sold from underneath them, are never really widely credited. And he is a man who, unlike some of the big name managers with no connection to Manchester United, is going to be prepared to put his head on the chopping block. He's going to be prepared to give everything for the club because of his attachment to it.
Yeah, I think it does appear to be a wise decision. It was interesting what Alex said about the leaks that were coming out, and there was a lot of noise coming out from Solskjaer's camp, wasn't there, about what he was going to do, how he was going to do it, and what he's been doing in the past. And with Michael Carrick, he's just been there in the background. To the extent I thought it was nailed on that Solskjaer was going to get it because of the media attention. But it does kind of make sense for once with Manchester United that they've gone for the candidate that is Manchester United through and through. That has a recent managerial success to a degree. And I think it probably is in this situation. It's not the ideal manager. I mean, they should be getting a permanent manager now, and they should have had a plan in place, and they should have a process. To be the director of football at Man United, you need at least 10 years experience, not 9 months. And it's you should be they should be getting one of the senior directors of football in world football, not just someone that's been director of football at Southampton for 9 months, working in the academy at Manchester City, and got to know the right people. And it's shocking that this situation has arisen, but I think Carrick does seem a safe pair of hands for in this ridiculous situation.
Yeah, Michael Carrick was appointed on the 24th of October, 2022. He took over a Middlesbrough team that were 21st in the Championship at the time. He got them to the playoffs, lost in the semi-finals to Coventry. That's quite an achievement, by the way. October 21st, and then getting into the playoffs. He lost a load of players during the summer of 2023. There's a big churn there. Akpom, who was his top scorer, Archer, Ramsey, Giles. That had an impact on the next season. They did bring players in. They missed out on the playoffs by 4 points at the end of 2024, but he did lead them to the semi-finals of the League Cup, where they were beaten by Chelsea. Well, they actually beat Chelsea in the first leg and then were beaten by Chelsea in the second legs. They elevated Morgan Rogers from a £1 million asset to a £15 million asset. So you can see positives in the appointment of Michael Carrick. But one of the things I wanted to touch on, Crook, was about the dressing room. So much was made about the need to cleanse the dressing room, to turn the culture of Manchester United around. Ruben Amorim was given the freedom to be able to do that just 1 year ago. Now, having done that, that has meant that he has lost significant bodies in his squad. His squad is lighter as a result of that. Manchester United could only bring in a certain number of players because of PSR, because of financial difficulties. So it has had a knock-on effect as to how many bodies he's actually been able to have in the building at any one time. The youth system obviously isn't as good as it used to be because they're not producing as many talents, although a couple of them have stepped up recently. And Aidan Heaven looks like a decent acquisition. But having given him the keys to the castle and said, cleanse our dressing room, could we be in a situation now where the players once again think that the power is with them rather than with the boss?
Not necessarily, because I don't think there was really any suggestion there was major issues between Ruben Amorim and the players. I know there was an incident in training where him and Lisandro Martinez almost came to blows, but that's not as uncommon as you think. I think the bigger issue here is that they've got rid of all the wide players. And if you look at Michael Carrick, when he was an interim charge, he played that 4-2-3-1 formation at United, but there was a lot of emphasis on the likes of Jadon Sancho and Marcus Rashford to hit the flanks and play as old-style wingers. It was the same at Middlesbrough. They don't really have that option. They've tried to change Patrick Dorgu from a wing-back into a winger in the last couple of games, but he's not got the footballing capability to do that. So that's the bigger issue for me. And again, I'll go back to what I've said on this podcast. The DNA of Manchester United is about young players. And obviously there's been a lot of talk about Kobbie Mainoo, who's not covered himself in glory since he's come back in the team. I'll admit that, but his confidence looks shot to pieces. But also, the club is built on width. You know, I grew up in the days of Andre Kanchelskis and Ryan Giggs and Lee Sharp and latterly David Beckham and Cristiano Ronaldo. And I think that's the way that Michael Carrick will want to play. But I'm not sure he's got the players at his disposal to do that. And what
is there a recall clause in the Sancho and Rashford loan deals?
Not that I'm aware of. And, you know, Marcus Rashford is having the time of his life at Barcelona. Just seen pictures of him dancing in the dressing room after El Clasico. But the other point you've got to make here, we're halfway through the transfer window. Now, the first cracks in the relationship between Ruben Amorim and the hierarchy were over the fact they don't really want to bring any players in this window. By hiring an interim until the end of the season, they've given themselves a free pass because they can say, look, we've not got a permanent manager. We don't want to buy players who might not fit into what the new man wants to do. So it's very clever from Ineos because they know by hiring Michael Carrick that the pundits are going to get off their backs. They're not going to criticise a former teammate. That the fans will be happy because he's a club legend and they don't have to spend any money in the window. But what they're effectively doing is they're writing off the rest of the season.
Which is a bit weird, really, isn't it? Because Manchester United still have got every chance of finishing in the top 5, which could be a Champions League place. And the Champions League is the paymaster, right? So the season isn't over, Terry, is it?
No, and it appears that they're complacent by thinking they can still do it with this method of sacking the manager, putting a caretaker one in there, getting an interim manager, not spending money, and they still think that it's going to be possible to qualify in the top 5. And that is possible. It certainly isn't impossible for Manchester United under Carrick to go on a run. It comes down to the bottom line. We talk about the sporting director again. It comes down to player recruitment and the choices of players those players being allowed to leave the club, and the recruitment. I think there's a little bit of a hit back at the moment from the suits, from people in football, from supporters in general, and they're looking at, instead of the manager and the players, they're looking at the suits that run football clubs. They're looking at the data nerds that bring in players. You know, the data analysis who bring in decide, you know, this is the best right wing and this is the best centre forward according to our data. And there's a little bit of a hit back at the moment. And I think those people, they've been hidden for too long. I mean, I see game after game on television, and it really winds me up. It really irritates me when you see the director of football at a home match He should be at any other game in the world apart from sitting in the director's box next to the owner, watching the home match of a Manchester United or a Spurs or a Chelsea. They should be out doing on their travels, doing their job, finding players. And I think at the moment there seems to be a hit back. But if Man United stagnate this season and there isn't any pressure on the players, they want to qualify for the Champions League, of course. But a lot of them are probably thinking, will I be here next season? Will I be somewhere else? And if they send out a signal that now that they're complacent about this season, then that will have an impact on results and performances for sure.
And that's my point about, changing the dressing room and the culture of the club. It was all part of a long-term strategy. It was a long-term strategy that lasted just over 13 months. And that's the problem. If you haven't got one of those, you're in massive dodge as a football club. You have to have the right structure, the right vision, and the right strategy to achieve that vision. And Manchester United, as we say every week, seemingly on this podcast, do not have any of those at this moment in time. Or if they do, it's just a pipe dream because they haven't put the tools in place to be able to achieve it. The first game in charge for the new interim manager will be, good luck, the Manchester Derby on Saturday, live on talkSPORT. And we're looking forward to being there for that one. And listen, I really hope that Michael Carrick is a massive success at Manchester United because he's a young British manager getting an opportunity in the Premier League. But Terry, if you've been listening to our podcast over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about sporting directors and the glare of the journalist spotlight has to now be turned on them because football people have decided, Glasner, Maresca, Amorim, earlier in the season it was happening elsewhere as well, have started to talk out about the relationship between the dugout and the boardroom. No such problems in the FA Cup this weekend and not down at Moss Rose, where the greatest giant killing in FA Cup history took place. Well, this isn't just an underdog win, is it? It's a proper Phoenix from the Flames story. Macclesfield Town wound up in 2020. Macclesfield FC born the same year. They've climbed the leagues, and 5 years later, they've knocked out the holders of the FA Cup at home at Moss Rose. And an emotional layer added to this because of the tragic death of their young player, Ethan McLeod, last month. And you've got all the ingredients of an unbelievable story that really leans, Terry, into the magic of the FA Cup.
It's incredible from both teams' perspective as well. You've got Crystal Palace with the greatest day in the club history in their last FA Cup match, winning the trophy. And then the next game in the FA Cup, they go out to Macclesfield. It had all the ingredients of an underdog victory, didn't it? And it wasn't. I didn't pay much attention to the fixture beforehand, but then afterwards you go, oh, plastic pitch. Oh, Wayne Rooney's brother is the manager, and it's a Phoenix club that's similar to AFC Wimbledon that all those years ago. And the way they started the game, kick-off, the goal scorer Paul Dawson gets a cut head from the opening seconds of the game when they just lump it down the pitch, goes out for the throw. There's a clash of heads. It looks like a non-league bandage, doesn't it? The bandage does stay in place for the entire 90 minutes. It does look like, with all due respect, they wouldn't happen in the Premier League. The bandage kept coming. Even when he scores the goal, his teammate is patching him up just prior to the set piece coming in the box. That doesn't happen in the Premier League. It had all the ingredients, and then when you look at it afterwards, and you go, yeah, they played well, they dug in, they old-fashioned football. The defenders headed it, kicked it, tackled everything, and Crystal Palace just weren't prepared. They played some young players. They were replaced at half-time. Oliver Glasner clearly underestimated the opponent, and I get why he would. Crystal Palace are in Europe. They're playing lots of games. Not everything is going their way in the Premier League. And he probably thought it was a good opportunity to make some changes. But at half-time, he tried to rectify that quickly, a sign of panic, putting on the more experienced players, the usual players, but it still didn't work. And it's an incredible story. Even the way the chairman bought the club, on Rightmove, bought the stadium on Rightmove, and it admitted he'd been drinking and suddenly bought himself a football stadium. What am I going to do with it? And it's the classic FA Cup story. It's the 117 places. It's the biggest shock ever, isn't it? Official shock in terms of official statistics. The previous was 108. I haven't been able to find out who that was. But this is one of those giant killing acts that's going to be remembered for the next 20, 30 years at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. Wasn't the 108 last year when Maidstone beat Ipswich? Wasn't that 108? It wasn't far off if it wasn't the case. Paul Dawson playing with a bandage around his head like a war hero, like Terry has been saying. He's never buying a drink in that town ever again, is he? Like he'll be able to walk on water. I think Oliver Glasner will never have to buy a drink in Macclesfield either. To be honest with you, he got the right hump afterwards, though, didn't he? Saying that the under-21s could have done better than his team today. But does he have to take a bit of responsibility too, Crook?
Not really, I don't think. I'm looking at the team here. Obviously, Gay's playing, Richards is playing, Wharton is playing, Jeremy Pino is playing. They rested Mateta because of the pitch, but they should have had more than enough. The Crystal Palace's reserves, plus those established first-team players, to get the job done. And I think actually it wasn't the manager whose attitude wasn't right; it was the players. And I tell you what happened: Dawson picked up that head injury, didn't he? Literally, the first play of the game, he's gone clattering into Uche, I think it was, and it set the tone. After that, I don't think Palace fancied it very much. Macclesfield were in their faces. The worry you'd have if you're a Palace fan is that every time Oliver Glasner attempts to rotate, it backfires. He only made 3 changes in the Conference League when they lost at home to Larnaca. Obviously, he made more changes than that for their final group game when they missed out on a place in the top 8. So that tells me that the squad isn't deep enough, and actually a lot of those players who are coming in aren't really stepping up. But we're not expecting massive investment in this window. Obviously, they've signed Brennan Johnson for a club record fee. I don't think Oliver Glasner, despite the glory of last season, will be too gutted that they've not got the FA Cup to contend with. I think Europe probably is his priority, but that doesn't hide the embarrassment of becoming the first holders to get knocked out by a non-league team since, 1908, 1909?
You do not want to be the story on FA Cup weekend, do you? But they certainly were, there's no doubt about it. That was the theme of Arsenal's trip down to Fratton Park as well. They didn't want to be Sunday's story, but they went behind really early on. Colby Bishop scoring after 3 minutes. It was a proper cup tie, this, and Arsenal could never really quite shake Portsmouth off. There was loads of wind and rain swirling around down at Fratton Park. The noise was terrific, as always. The away end was really good as well. The Arsenal fans were terrific in support of Mikel Arteta. And I think he was pretty humpy, actually, in the first half, because they had the opportunity after they'd gone in front to make it 3-1 just before the break. And Noni Madueke, with a really poor penalty, sent it wide of the post. And actually, that was the issue. They just couldn't get away from Portsmouth, Terry.
In the end, it looks a comfortable victory. But when you look at the manner of the goals, the set pieces were important against Arsenal. And I'm not being critical of set pieces. And Arsenal, I know they're people make
of all people, Terry, I don't think you could be critical of set pieces,
exactly.
Having won the FA Cup with Wimbledon.
With a set piece. At that year, Dennis Wise got a move to Chelsea, I think, just shortly after, because he was responsible for assisting 75% of our goals. They were all set pieces. So I've always been aware of the importance of attacking and defending set pieces, and Arsenal made it fashionable again. And they needed them in this game. I mean, it was a tough fixture. It would have been a surprise victory for Portsmouth, but they are the Championship, and it's a difficult place to go and play. So Arsenal, did make a few changes, but they've still got a formidable squad, and they're able somehow to make sure that they weren't the story. And that's, as you said, Sam, that's the big thing. You don't want to be the big story in the FA Cup.
10 changes actually for Arsenal. Martinelli getting a hat-trick in the week where he was involved in a lot of controversy over the pushing off the pitch of Connor Bradley. He let his feet and his head do the talking down at Fratton Park. The one issue I sort of had with it was that Portsmouth's defending of corners has been absolutely abysmal all season. They've now conceded 17 goals from corner kicks over the course of the campaign. And Arsenal had 4 corner kicks and scored from 3 of them at one point. That's negligent, isn't it? I don't care what level you're at. The fact is you can't keep conceding goals like that every time a corner comes into the box. So as much as I was full of praise for the way they played Portsmouth, they had loads of injuries themselves. They had people coming back from injury who hadn't played too often. The fact is that if you want to compete at a high level, you've got to be able to defend your box from a high ball into it, Crook.
Yeah, and as you say, it's been a theme of the season. I know a lot of Pompey fans, as you do, and they've been bemoaning their lack of ability to defend set pieces. And that's the frustrating thing, really. If you're the lower ranked team, you want the Premier League side to beat you with quality football and incredible goals, and that wasn't the case. And you know what? I watched a lot of Exeter against Manchester City. Obviously, City scored 10. A lot of those were quite preventable as well. I actually texted a mate who was in the away end and said, "What some of these goals you're letting in are criminal." And he said, "Would you believe defensively, normally we're okay. They certainly weren't okay in that game."
Hey, what about the XG in that game? Have you seen the XG in that game? 2.27. Manchester City's XG is 2.27.
Well, that shows that they've benefited from quite a few gifts, Grecians.
2 own goals, wasn't it, as well? So
Maybe
that's
3.
obviously going to contribute to it.
I think it's an interesting point you make, Sam. Sorry about the set pieces. If you are good at them, every time you get one, you believe you're going to score. If you're bad at defending them, every time you concede a set piece, you're thinking we're going to concede, and it becomes it's like when those teams that suddenly concede late goals or goals just before half time. Every time it comes to that stage of the game and you're in that run of form, everyone panics. So with Arsenal, they believe in every corner, and they would have been aware that Portsmouth was struggling defending set pieces. They would have worked a touch harder on it, and it paid off for Arsenal, certainly.
I mean, it's not quite Terry Gibson getting across the near post and flicking it in, but he's not the biggest guy in the world, is he, Martinelli? Let's be honest.
He's bigger than me, that's for sure. Who isn't?
Tottenham were better in the second half, but really disappointing in the first. What's the situation with Thomas Frank now? Because there were boos at half-time in the game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and it wasn't very impressive, that first 45 minutes. I said to you actually on the phone, Crook, well, they were better in the second half, and you said, yeah, but how much influence did the manager have at halftime? Or was it another situation that the players took it upon themselves to try and change tack?
Yeah, certainly that's the impression I got, that the players got themselves together at half-time and almost held their own team talk, as has happened on more than one occasion this season. I think you can see that there's an issue between Thomas Frank and the players. I'm not sure that they're buying into him, as we've been saying for a while. And from what I'm told, there's a bit of a split at the board level. You know, there's a lot of people there who are thinking this isn't going to work out. There are others who want to give Thomas Frank more time, as I think he deserves personally. But you know what really wound me up about this game? And I mentioned this again when we were on Friday after the scenes between the players and the fans at Bournemouth. João Paulinho trying to be the tough guy after full time, you know, getting in the face of Ollie Watkins as he was celebrating with the Villa fans. It's too late. You know, that's optics for the cameras. Don't start showing your fighting spirit now. Actually, Paulinho played pretty well in the game, but my point is that Tottenham players too often just play up to the cameras after they've lost a game, when actually the fans, I'm sure, would much rather see more fight during the 90 minutes, because there was no fight in that first half at all. But they made it far too easy for Aston Villa, who, to be fair, named a much stronger team than I thought Unai Emery would. I thought Morgan Rogers, for one, would be rested, but he wasn't. And, you know, Aston Villa's season continues to go from strength to strength.
And they're a very good side, Aston Villa, by the way. So that Tottenham were always up against it. This is the third best team in the land. They picked Tottenham apart in that first half with brilliant attacking play, super one-touch football on the edge of the penalty area, which opened them up for the first goal. Second goal, well taken by Rodgers, who's terrific. They've got huge amounts of talent. And look, they don't have that Tottenham Hotspur, I don't think, not in the same way that Aston Villa do in terms of the level of quality in the squad. And that is a problem for Thomas Frank as well. But Crook's absolutely right. Pedro Porro sitting on the bench, throwing his arms around because a decision went against Tottenham right at the end of the game. Guys, the game started at 5:45. That's when you need to be at your very best, your hungriest and your most ardent, not when you're sitting on the bench after the game's already gone.
Yeah, I mean, I have a degree of sympathy for Thomas Frank, I have to be honest. And maybe as a Spurs fan and Spurs man, that I don't want another managerial change. None of them are working. It's been a problem forever. It's been in charge. So we have to look deeper at the problems. And I think with no Kulusevski, no Maddison, no Solanke this season, 3 players that would make a huge difference. And again, my issues are with player recruitment. Spurs have spent about 200 or 300 million on essentially 6 of the same player. And here you go, Tell, Moani, Manor Solomon joined the club, Brendan Johnson. There's about, Xavi Simons could be in that. They can be effective players. Odebear, Kudus, but none of them have become an effective goal scorer, a creative player. And you could pick any of those players. Matthias Tell was another one. And so the Spurs have spent the money. I mean, they have injured players. They have players away enough come duty. I'm not making excuses for Thomas Frank. He doesn't need me to do that. But I think, again, this goes down to player recruitment. We've got Dominic Solanke, Richarlison. Solanke's been missing. Richarlison has been the only option up front. He's not been prolific. He's never been prolific. It's just that
And now he's injured.
Yeah, and I look at Spurs and I think we do. People say they don't spend the money. They do, but they just haven't spent it wisely. And when you look at the performance of the weekend, kind of sums up where Spurs are.
They do spend the money, but they spend the money on what they think is potential and on wages that are lower than most others in the Premier League. So if you look at their annual wage turnover, they're bottom half, right? So, and if you speak to any CEO of a football club, they'll tell you what you spend on wages usually translates to where you finish in the league table. So it should be no surprise. Look at Portsmouth. Portsmouth we've just been talking about moments ago. They're 23rd in terms of playing budget in the Championship. They're 21st. So they're actually punching above their average. Last year, they were probably the same, but managed to stay in the division. So that shows that John Mousinho actually is working very well with the group that he has got. And listen, Thomas Frank is probably... It's got nothing to do with this situation because this is a situation that's been going on for years and years and years, as you've been saying. And now they're losing Fabio Paratici, who's only just come back from a ban. He's going off to pastures new. So Johan Langer is going to be in charge of player recruitment. But they're not going to do anything in this transfer window. As I said, I think it was New Year's Day. I think Crook and I were on air together. And I said on New Year's Day that I'd had a whisper that they've decided that unless they could get a big name player, and that was Semenyo, they didn't get him, they weren't going to spend the big money in the January transfer window. So Thomas Frank, who says they're working very hard and they're all aligned to get bodies in for short-term and long-term success, is going to have to work with what he's got, I'm afraid. Right, that's it for the FA Cup. Let's take a little tour around the country and look at the Carabao Cup semi-finals, which are both live on talkSPORT this week. Newcastle, the holders, the current kings of the cup, defending their crown against the perennial powerhouse Manchester City, have won this cup more often than not in the last 10 years. Chelsea against Arsenal, a high-stakes London derby under the lights at Stamford Bridge, which sees Liam Rosenior take his seat in the dugout at home for the first time. Let's start with Newcastle United, Carabao Cup holders, Crook. They're looking to make back-to-back Wembley appearances, and St James's Park has become a bit of a fortress again. They're currently on a 13-game unbeaten run at home, but Manchester City have just demolished Exeter 10-1, and they're eyeing up a return to Wembley themselves.
Yeah, and we know this is a competition that Pep Guardiola has always taken seriously. It was basically City's cup for a few seasons, wasn't it? And I think in fairness to him, he respects both cup competitions. I mean, it was a remarkably strong Manchester City lineup against Exeter, and obviously they got the job done and some. Newcastle have got more injury issues. Tino Livramento picked up a hamstring issue in that dramatic penalty shootout win over Bournemouth, so I think it's unlikely that he's going to feature. Obviously, Lewis Hall is available, so he comes in for him. But I think this is going to be absolutely key for Newcastle, not only winning at St James's Park, but I think actually they need to win by a couple of goals to give themselves any real chance, because as good as they are at home, their away form, both in the Premier League and the Champions League, has let them down this season. And if City are within punching distance in that second leg, you would imagine that they'll be the team who end up going through. And Newcastle's brave defence of the trophy could be over.
Yeah, and it was ironic, really, that last year it was their away performance at Arsenal that got them to the final and set up that dramatic second leg. They were brilliant in both legs, actually, of the Carabao Cup semi-final last year. He won't park the bus, Eddie Howe, will he, Terry Gibson? Newcastle beat City 2-1 in the Premier League earlier in the season by pressing high and unsettling City's rhythm.
Yeah, the issue for Eddie Howe is going to be, can his players go again so quickly after the extra time and penalties affair against Bournemouth? And they've been involved in a few dramatic games lately, so they are a more attack-minded team than they were at the start of the season. Can they go again as quickly to ram home this advantage before they go to the away leg? It's going to be a big ask, to be honest. I think there'll be one or two changes from Newcastle, but I think they played a strong team at the weekend. They're obviously going to play the strong team against City. Who's available, who's not? Who the manager Eddie Howe sees during the next couple of days or so in training, whether they're feeling the effects of that game against Bournemouth. City, on the other hand, were able to play the reserves, play the youngsters, and win comfortably. Haaland only played half a game. Some players appeared in the second half. It's going to be interesting to see. I think that City have a slight advantage because of the weekend's action, to be honest.
Antoine Semenyo, Ryan Cherky, all involved at the weekend. They could be involved here on Wednesday night. Cherky scored a stunner in the quarterfinal against Brentford, didn't he? Actually, Barnes and Lewis Miley have come to the fore for Newcastle United when they've really needed them the most as well. And Trippier coming back at the weekend is a major plus. But as you say, far too often they've been hampered by injury this season, Newcastle. Let's move to Wednesday night. Liam Rosenior has taken the reins at Chelsea. And after taking charge of his first game at the weekend against Charlton, bit of an interesting lineup in that game. Obviously, lots of players rotated out. He's immediately thrust into the high-stakes London derby semi-final against Arsenal. This has all the hallmarks of 1998. Now, for those of you who don't know, that Chelsea played Arsenal in the League Cup semi-final of 1998. And in between the first and second leg, Ruud Gullit was sacked as the manager. And installed in his place was Gianluca Vialli, a young upstart who was not getting any run in the team. And Vialli, he named an aggressive team against Arsenal for the second leg. And Chelsea overturned a deficit and got to the final against Middlesbrough. Can they summon the spirit of 1998, Crook, and beat Arsenal and get to the final? What do you reckon?
Well, I think he'll go strong, Rosenior, because, getting to a cup final so early in your Chelsea tenure, when a lot of people are actually doubting if you are the man to make the step up, would be a hell of a feather in the cap. But the fact that Arsenal made 10 changes at Portsmouth and were able to leave Bukayo Saka for one on the bench completely. Obviously, Victor Gyökeres didn't feature either. You would imagine that the big guns will be back for this game. So it's going to be tough, but Chelsea have proved already this season they can go toe-to-toe with Arsenal. We were there at Stamford Bridge for the Premier League fixture when they were down to 10 men and obviously still managed to grind out a draw and actually had chances where they could even have won that game. So, yeah, I think this is a really intriguing semi-final. But again, given Arsenal's home record, Chelsea are going to need a victory, I think, to take into the return fixture. And is it Arsenal unbeaten now in 27 of their last 28 games in all competition? They just show no signs of easing up, and they're in that wonderful winning groove. So over the two legs, even if he makes changes, I think Arsenal will have too much.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right, and they should really, because as you said, they've got the most experienced and balanced squad in the Premier League. But you never know, Terry. You never know. Do you think that Liam Rosenior is being harshly treated? I mean, he's getting a little bit of stick, isn't he, on social media from rival fans about his college professor look and appearing to communicate well. How dare he? He needs to be given a bit of a chance. I mean, some of his jokes might have fallen flat in the press conference the other day, but he's obviously trying to ingratiate himself, isn't he?
Yeah, sometimes you can be guilty of talking too much and answering. A manager with more experience would probably not answer some of the questions that are coming his way, but he wants to create a good impression to the media. He wants the media on his side. He's aware of a little bit of a backlash that he's been chosen to be the manager of Chelsea. So I think it's an interesting one in terms of, and a more experienced manager would say less. But Liam has been quite, open and honest about the opportunity. It's a tough gig. I do look at it and think young manager going into it's a young squad at Chelsea, but there are still senior players there who will be looking and saying, come on then, show us what you can do. It's a tough gig. I saw him in his first training session, although he appears confident. And I know him. I coached him when I was assistant manager at Fulham. And he's more confident now than he was then as a player, that's for sure. So it's been a bit of a transformation in terms of his personality. But I wish him well. It's good to see young British managers getting an opportunity, particularly at the big clubs. But it's a tough gig. I saw him in his first training session. He looked nervous. And you are. Whatever team you go and manage, whatever level, your first session as a manager, you're thinking, I have to make the right impression to impress the players. And the game against Charlton was a bit of a gimme, to be honest. But this one is his first real test, to be honest, and it's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we crave young British managers coming through the system and being given opportunities. We could be in a situation where the managers of Chelsea and Manchester United by the end of the week are two young Englishmen. And that kind of feels like something we should celebrate rather than denigrate. But we do seem to have this sort of obsession. And maybe it's because of the circumstances that they've taken over. Maybe it's because they are very young and a little bit inexperienced. But we do seem to want to immediately tear them down before they've even started. Do you understand what I mean, Crook?
Yeah, I just think maybe the problem is that both Chelsea and Manchester United fans are living in the past, because I said on air, Chelsea used to be under Roman Abramovich, the club that went for the best in class, both in terms of players and managers. You know, we're used to a revolving door at Chelsea, but usually
Well,
the
Crook,
next
they still go for the best
rank
in
is
class. It's
proven.
just a younger year group.
Well, it's now a place where managers go to learn on the job, and I don't mean that with any disrespect to Liam Rossini. Obviously, he's worked his way up from the EFL, and good luck to him. But it seems like a massive risk for Chelsea. And in terms of Manchester United, yeah, I get what you're saying about Michael Carrick, young British coach. But would any other top Premier League club be looking to appoint him? It's only because of his Manchester United connection, isn't it? And I like you, I think he did a good job at Middlesbrough. But there's a difference between doing a good job at Middlesbrough and trying to take Manchester United back to where they want to be and turning around the Titanic, as Scott Minto keeps on telling us.
Yes. Well, Crook doesn't feel very happy this morning. So if
You know what? Not
notice
only do I not feel very happy, I said to you last night, just listening to the end of that United game on the radio, that was as low as I've felt as a Manchester United fan, because I just don't see the direction of travel that the club are going in. I don't see it getting better anytime soon. And I don't really see too much to look forward to for the rest of this season.
Yeah, he's been really moody. He rang me last night after I watched the end of the game. I said to him, "It was pretty poor, mate. I've got to be honest with you." And he was lamenting this, that, and the other. I don't know where to go with my football club. But he did wake up this morning and order Mrs. Crook to get him a peppermint tea in his Eric Cantona mug. So
Those
it's
were
not
the
all
days.
doom and gloom, is it?
It sounds like me as a Spurs fan, Sam. But at least we can still win the Champions League.
And me, you know, the Chelsea situation is exactly the same. You know, you sort of sit there and you go, is it a football club? Is it a player trading entity? Are we there just to elevate certain people so that we can sell them on for more money? You know, Manchester United don't seem to have a plan. And actually, Crook said, at least your club have got a plan. Yeah, they've got a plan, but it's not necessarily one that I think the supporters are fully on board with. And with Tottenham Hotspur, this has been going on for years. So there's a lot of clubs, I think, in the same boat. And I think, again, it goes back to that conversation that we had last week, the end of Friday, maybe. I think we did it on this podcast. Sporting directors and business people at one end of the spectrum and football people at the other end of the spectrum. And the football people have had enough of the business people trying to take control of football matters. And until that swings back the other way, the balance swings back the other way, you're going to get a lot of disappointed supporters and upset people in the dugout. Live football this week on talkSPORT. Liverpool-Barnsley, the final FA Cup tie of the weekend, is live on Monday night. Tuesday night, we've got Carabao Cup action from Newcastle against Manchester City. Wednesday night, it's Chelsea against Arsenal, the first leg of the semi-final there. And then we will be back on Thursday to preview all of the weekend's actions. The Premier League returns, and there'll be a new man in the dugout as Manchester United encounter the Derby live on talkSPORT this Saturday. And Crook can't wait for it. Can you, Crook?